The cold kitchen floor felt like ice beneath me as I lay there, clutching my side, my body racked with pain. Each wave of agony surged through me like a knife twisting in my abdomen, and I could barely catch my breath. My vision blurred, the room spinning in and out of focus. "Mommy, are you okay?" My 7-year-old daughter, Emily, stood just a few feet away, her small face contorted with worry. Her voice trembled, a whisper barely escaping her lips. I think I have appendicitis," I managed to gasp, fighting the sharpness of the pain. It felt like my insides were being ripped apart, but I forced a strained smile for her, trying to appear calm, even though my body screamed in distress. "Mommy will be fine, sweetheart," I whispered back, though my words barely seemed to match the terror in my heart. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing closer. John, my husband, appeared in the doorway, his hand firmly gripping the handle of a suitcase. He looked at me, but not with concern, no, not at all. His expression was one of annoyance, impatience. "What's going on, Evelyn? Why are you on the floor?" he asked, his voice more annoyed than caring. I could barely form the words through the pain, but I forced myself to speak. "I think it's my appendix. I need to go to the hospital." Every word felt like a fight, a struggle against the crushing pain in my abdomen. John's eyes flickered down at me, then back up to the suitcase in his hand. "Appendicitis?" he scoffed, as if it were something trivial, like a mild stomach ache. "You're probably just overreacting. You've been complaining all week. It's probably just indigestion." His words hit me like a slap. "John, please." I reached out, desperate. "It's really bad. We need to go now." But he just glanced at his watch, his face unreadable. "I can't miss this trip with Rachel. Just call a taxi or something." The words came out coldly, detached. My heart sank. "John, I can't even move," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. I couldn't believe this was happening. He was just leaving. "Lily's here," I pleaded, trying one last time to make him understand, to make him care. But there was no spark of compassion in his eyes. No empathy. "Fine," he muttered, already stepping toward the door. "Call me if it gets worse." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of my own home. The pain was unbearable now, but worse still was the emptiness that lingered in the wake of his departure. The betrayal. The realization that I was truly, utterly alone in this moment of crisis. My chest tightened, and I could feel tears beginning to sting at the corners of my eyes. But Emily was there. She rushed to my side, her tiny hands gripping mine as she whimpered, her voice breaking. "Mommy, don't be sick. You have to be okay." I pulled her close, clinging to her warmth, her love, because it was the only thing that was keeping me tethered to this world. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone. With every passing second, the pain seemed to grow sharper, unbearable. I knew I had to act fast. I had only one person left I could rely on. I dialed Michael's number, my brother, the one person who I knew wouldn't turn his back on me. As the phone rang, my world felt like it was collapsing around me. "Hello?" Michael's voice was like a lifeline, steady and strong. "Michael," I gasped, barely able to form words, my body writhing in pain. I need you. It's my appendix, Michael. I can't move. I don't know what to do." Lily's scared. The silence on the other end felt like an eternity, but then Michael's voice came through, calm and sure. "Hold on, Evelyn. I'm coming. Stay with me, okay? I'll be there soon." And just like that, my only hope was now on the way. But as I lay there, the seconds ticking by, it wasn't just the physical pain that gripped me, it was the deep, crushing realization that I had been abandoned. That John, the man who was supposed to love me, had chosen her over me. And this betrayal, this moment of raw vulnerability, would change everything. As I closed my eyes, waiting for Michael to arrive, I knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. I was no longer the woman who would stand by and silently suffer. This was the beginning of something new, something I couldn't yet fully understand, but I would find out. The pain didn't let up. It surged through me in waves, relentless, unforgiving. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a prison. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the burning sensation in my abdomen, the raw, gut-wrenching pain that seemed to expand with every passing second. But it wasn't just the physical torment that hurt the most, it was the feeling of being abandoned, the realization that the man I had spent my life with had walked out on me, leaving me alone with nothing but my fear and a child who deserved so much more. Lily's small, trembling hands held mine, her little fingers trying desperately to comfort me. "Mommy, please don't be sick," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of hope. The sound of her voice, so full of fear and innocence, sent a sharp pang through my heart. I tried to smile, but it felt so fake, so hollow. "I'm here, baby." "Mommy's here," I whispered back, though I wasn't sure if I even believed it myself. My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me from the dark spiral of thoughts threatening to consume me. It was Michael. I didn't even hesitate before answering. "Hold on, I'm almost there," Michael's voice cracked through the receiver. He was always steady, always dependable, traits that seemed to be vanishing from the man I'd married. "Just breathe, okay? I'll be there as fast as I can." I wanted to cry, to scream, to let out the fury building up inside me. But instead, I held on to his words like a lifeline. In that moment, I wasn't sure how much longer I could take the pain. But I knew Michael was coming. He would be here soon, and maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to face this nightmare alone. The minutes felt like hours. Every breath was shallow, every movement sent jolts of pain through my body. My mind kept drifting back to John, to the empty look in his eyes when he walked out the door, suitcase in hand, ready to leave me here to suffer. How could he be so cold? How could he leave me, not even offering to help or comfort me? And Rachel, his damn mistress, she wasn't even a thought in my mind until now, but somehow, her presence loomed over everything. It was as if she had already stolen what was mine, just by being in his life. The sound of a car screeching to a stop outside snapped me back to reality. Michael. It was Michael. He was here. He burst through the door, his face a mix of panic and resolve. The moment he saw me, lying on the floor in pain, his face hardened with determination. Without a word, he rushed to my side, kneeling beside me, and immediately began to check on me, his strong hand steady as he touched my forehead and assessed the situation. "Michael, you're here," I murmured, relief flooding through me as his presence wrapped around me like a shield. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel so alone. I didn't feel like I was drowning in my own sorrow. "We're going to the hospital, okay? Just stay with me," Michael said, his voice soothing but firm, as if he were trying to reassure both of us. He scooped me up with surprising ease, lifting me into his arms like I weighed nothing. I could barely keep my eyes open, but I clung to him, letting his strength carry me. Outside, the world seemed distant. I could hear the rush of traffic, the sounds of the city going about its business as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything was falling apart. John's absence, Rachel's interference, it all felt like a storm brewing in my chest, a storm that threatened to consume everything I had known, everything I had loved. As Michael drove me to the hospital, the only sound between us was the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of the car's tires on the pavement. Emily sat in the back seat, clutching her stuffed bear, her eyes wide and full of worry, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. I stared out the window, lost in thought, trying to ignore the pain that refused to let me go. But as the city lights flickered by, something inside me snapped. Something deep within me awakened in the face of this betrayal. John had left me. He had walked away in my moment of need. But I was still here. I was still fighting. And I wasn't going to let him destroy me. The hospital was a blur. I remember being wheeled in on a stretcher, the sterile smell of antiseptic in the air, the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses as they surrounded me. But in the midst of it all, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. This was it. The beginning of the end. I didn't know what would come after, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Not with John. Not with Rachel. Not with any of it. And when the anesthetic took over, dulling the pain and sending me into a sleep I so desperately needed, I didn't dream of John. I didn't dream of Rachel. I dreamed of strength. Of independence. Of a future where I didn't have to be at the mercy of someone else's selfishness. This was only the beginning. The beeping of machines was the first thing I heard when I woke up, a constant rhythm in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. My body ached, each movement feeling foreign, like I was waking up from a nightmare I couldn't fully escape. The bright white light above me made everything feel too sharp, too real, and for a moment, I thought I was still trapped in the pain of the past few hours. But then I saw Michael sitting by my bedside, his face etched with concern but also relief, and everything came rushing back. "Hey, you're awake," he said, his voice soft, as if afraid to disturb the fragile moment we were sharing. I blinked, trying to focus, trying to make sense of it all. The hospital, the surgery, the agony, everything felt like a blur, like a distant memory I couldn't fully grasp. "How long?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Not long," Michael replied, his tone light but his eyes full of concern. "You've been in surgery for a while, but you're okay now. They took care of the appendix. Everything's going to be fine." His words were soothing, but they didn't erase the reality of what had just happened, what John had done. I closed my eyes, the sting of his abandonment still fresh, raw. John wasn't here. He hadn't even bothered to check in. The one person who should have been at my side, the person who swore to love and cherish me, was nowhere to be found. It didn't take long for the bitterness to rise in my throat. I swallowed it back, not wanting to let it consume me, but it was hard to ignore. It was hard to forget the way he had left me, so easily, with no regard for the life we'd built, for the woman he'd promised to love. "Where's Emily?" I asked, the sudden surge of worry making my chest tighten. "She's with Mom and Dad. They're taking care of her. She was scared, but she's okay." "Your parents are really good with her," Michael reassured me. I nodded, feeling a little relief knowing Emily was safe, even if I wasn't with her. It broke my heart that she had witnessed me like this, that she'd had to see me in so much pain, with no one there to comfort her except me. But at least she was in good hands now. The door to the room opened slowly, and my heart skipped when I saw the figure standing in the doorway. It was Rachel. She didn't even hesitate as she stepped inside, her eyes flicking between Michael and me, a look of feigned concern plastered on her face. But it didn't take a genius to see the truth. She was the last person I wanted to see right now. "Hey, Jessica. How are you feeling?" Her voice was sickly sweet, too sweet, like she was trying to act like she cared when all I wanted to do was scream. I opened my mouth to respond, but Michael was already on his feet, his expression hardening as he stood between me and Rachel. "Get out, Rachel," he said, his voice low, cold. "This isn't the time." Rachel's eyes widened, but she didn't move. "No, you don't get to just. You've done enough. Get out." Michael's words were sharp, and the anger in his voice was palpable, but it wasn't just him. It was the feeling in the room, the deep, suffocating weight of betrayal that hung between us all. Rachel was silent, her face flushing with embarrassment, but she didn't protest further. After a long, uncomfortable moment, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the tile floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the silence she left behind. I didn't even look at her as she left. There was nothing she could say to me that would make a difference anymore. She had been part of the reason my world was falling apart, part of the reason I was lying in a hospital bed right now. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Michael sat back down beside me, his eyes softer now, but his anger still simmering beneath the surface. "You don't need her, Jessica," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You have me. You have our family. We'll get through this together." no matter what. I nodded, the lump in my throat growing as I reached out to take his hand. Thank you, I whispered, the words feeling too small for what I was feeling. In that moment, I realized something deep within me had shifted. I wasn't the same person who had been lying on the cold kitchen floor, helpless and broken. I wasn't the same person who had begged John to stay, to help me, only to have him turn his back and walk out. I was done being that woman. Done with the years of neglect, done with the betrayal, done with the silent suffering. John's absence was a wound, but it was also the spark I needed to ignite a fire inside me. A fire of strength, of independence, of defiance. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to let his selfishness define my life any longer. As I lay in the sterile hospital bed, surrounded by the beeping machines and the cold white walls, I made a promise to myself. I would take back control. I would rebuild my life, piece by piece, and I would do it for Emily. For me. The road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face it head-on. The pain in my abdomen was still there, a dull reminder of everything I had just gone through. But it was nothing compared to the strength I felt building inside me. I would survive this. I would thrive. And John, he would learn the hard way that abandoning me had been the biggest mistake of his life. The days following my surgery were a blur. The pain in my abdomen had subsided, but the wound left on my soul by John's abandonment festered with every passing hour. I tried to keep my focus on healing, on Emily, on moving forward. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always the nagging, searing truth that John had left me when I needed him the most. And as I lay in bed, trying to push past the heavy feeling in my chest, one thought kept repeating itself in my mind: this wouldn't be my life anymore. The first time John walked back through the door after I came home from the hospital, I wasn't sure how I would react. My heart clenched as I heard his familiar footsteps, but it wasn't with anticipation. It was with a strange mix of anger and something else, a quiet, cold fury that had been building in me ever since he walked out that night. "Why didn't you pick us up yesterday?" John's voice rang out as soon as the door swung open. He stormed in, suitcase still in hand, but this time, his annoyance was palpable, like a wave crashing against the calm of my home. His sister Rachel followed behind him, her eyes flicking nervously between him and me. We had to spend extra money on a taxi and train fares. Do you realize how inconvenient that was? I felt the tension in the room rise, thickening the air between us. My gaze hardened, and I refused to look away. I stood up slowly from the couch, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief, but also something else, empowerment. "Welcome back," I said, my voice icy, a tone I didn't even know I was capable of. "I'm sure your trip with Rachel was exhausting." John froze, clearly thrown off by my cold reception. Rachel, too, looked uncomfortable, her usual confident expression replaced by an awkward silence. "What's with the attitude, Evelyn?" John snapped, his eyes narrowing. He was taken aback, not used to seeing me like this. "Attitude?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "No, John. It's not an attitude. It's a reality check." I paused, letting the words hang between us like a heavy cloud. "While you were off enjoying your little getaway with Rachel, I was lying in a hospital bed, alone, having emergency surgery because of something you should have been there for." John blinked, his arrogance faltering for a brief moment as the weight of my words landed on him. "It's not like you were dying, Evelyn. You're fine now, aren't you?" he said, dismissing my pain with the wave of his hand, as though it was nothing. "No, John," I shot back, my voice rising now, "it's not just about being fine. It's about being there when your family needs you. It's about showing up when your wife is literally fighting for her life. But you weren't there. You chose her," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. For the first time, I saw something in John's eyes, regret, but it was fleeting, like a shadow passing over his face. Before he could respond, Michael stepped into the room. He'd arrived quietly, unnoticed, but his presence commanded attention. My parents, my in-laws, and even some extended family followed him in, standing behind me like an impenetrable wall. The weight of their collective gaze landed on John and Rachel like a 1,000-pound anchor. I didn't have to say another word. The silence in the room was deafening. John's confidence was crumbling, piece by piece. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around for an ally, but no one came to his defense. There was nowhere for him to hide. "This isn't just about this one time, John," Michael's voice broke the silence. He was calm, but his words carried the power of someone who had seen the truth for what it was. "It's about the fact that you've been putting Rachel's needs above your wife's for far too long. This isn't the first time you've chosen her over your family. And it won't be the last, will it?" Michael's words sliced through the tension like a knife. Rachel looked stunned, her mouth slightly agape, her usual boldness completely gone. She glanced at John, then back at the room full of people, her discomfort now palpable. John didn't know what to do, how to respond. His world was unraveling right in front of him, and there was no place left to hide. I stepped forward, my voice steady but filled with a quiet, burning rage. "You don't get to act like everything's fine. You don't get to walk back into my life and pretend nothing's changed. Everything has changed. And I'm not going to sit here and let you make excuses for the way you've treated me, for the way you've used me. I'm done, John. I'm done being invisible." John opened his mouth, likely to offer another excuse, but the look in my eyes shut him down before a word escaped. He could see it now, there was no way back. I had drawn the line. He had crossed it. And there was no going back to the way things were. The confrontation didn't end with a dramatic blow-up, but it didn't need to. The message had been made clear, both with my words and the unwavering support of the people who truly mattered. John wasn't just facing me anymore. He was facing a family that had finally seen through his lies, his selfishness, and his betrayal. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, a freedom I hadn't felt in years. And when everyone started to leave, one by one, I felt it. The power that came with standing my ground, with no longer allowing myself to be a pawn in someone else's game. As the door closed behind the last of our guests, I turned to face John. He was still standing there, silent, the realization of everything that had just transpired slowly sinking in. "You think you can just walk away from all of this, John?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less powerful. "You think I'll just forgive you, that I'll forget everything you've done?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told me everything. It was the look of someone who realized they had lost everything, and there was no turning back. "I'm getting a divorce," I said calmly, as if I were stating a simple fact. "And there's nothing you can do to change that." John opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. "Don't even bother, John. You've already said everything with your actions. There's nothing left to say." As I walked away from him, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The decision was made. The path was clear. There was no turning back now. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a weight lifted from my chest. I was finally free. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal meetings, paperwork, and endless sleepless nights. The quiet moments when I was alone, when I didn't have to put on a brave face for Emily or pretend everything was fine, were the hardest. The reality of what I was doing, what I had decided to do, settled into my bones like a cold weight. But with each passing day, I could feel something else too. A spark. A sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. The divorce proceedings weren't quick, and they weren't easy. John fought me every step of the way, sending lawyers to try and intimidate me into backing down, hoping I'd falter, that I'd beg him to come back. But I didn't. Not even for a second. As much as I wanted to scream, to tell him how much he had hurt me, I knew there was no point. There was nothing left between us. Every word he said only proved that the man I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone incapable of empathy, of understanding. At night, when Emily was asleep, I would sit on the couch, looking out the window, thinking about what my life had become. What it could become. The world outside seemed so distant, so far from the chaos inside. I wasn't sure how I would make it on my own, but I knew I had to try. There was no other option. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing more paperwork for the divorce, I heard the sound of a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw who it was. John. I didn't invite him in, didn't even acknowledge his presence at first. He stood there, his posture tense, his eyes avoiding mine. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us, thick and uncomfortable, as if the weight of everything unsaid was too much to bear. I know I've done things I can't take back, he said, his voice cracking. There was a sincerity in his tone, but it didn't reach his eyes. But Jessica, please. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. The words hung in the air, but they felt empty. They felt like the same words he had said 100 times before, empty promises that were meant to make him feel better, but meant nothing to me anymore. Sorry isn't enough anymore, John, I said, my voice calm, but the anger simmering just beneath the surface. You don't get to walk back into my life, say a few words, and think everything is going to be okay. You don't get to break me down and expect me to just forget about it. He stepped forward, as if wanting to close the distance between us, but I stood my ground, my gaze steady and unwavering. Please, Jessica, he pleaded, his voice softer now. I need you. I made a mistake. I know I messed up. But we can fix this. We can start over. I shook my head, feeling my pulse quicken. No, John. We can't fix this. It's done. There's nothing left to fix. He looked at me like he didn't understand. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he thought that after all the hurt, the betrayal, the lies, I would just welcome him back with open arms. But I couldn't. I couldn't even imagine going back to that life, to that version of myself. I was done. I'm done with you, I said firmly. And I'm done with this marriage. I'm not going to spend my life living in your shadow, waiting for you to choose me. I'm choosing myself, for the first time in years. John's face fell, the weight of my words crushing him. For the first time, he looked like he was truly realizing the gravity of what he had lost. But it was too late. I'm getting a divorce, John. And nothing you say or do will change that. I've already made my decision. It's over. He opened his mouth, as if to argue, but then closed it, his shoulders slumping in defeat. There was nothing left to say. As he turned and walked out of my life for good, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't relief, not yet. But it was a deep, quiet strength that I hadn't known I had. I was free. Free from the years of pain, the years of waiting for him to choose me. The divorce was finalized a few months later, and as I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't the weight of the past that was holding me down anymore. I had let it go. And with that release came something beautiful, a future. A future I was going to build on my own terms, without anyone telling me who I should be or how I should live. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new routine. Emily adjusted to the changes with remarkable resilience, her laughter filling the house again. I started working again, found a job that allowed me to regain some of the independence I had lost, and though it wasn't easy, I felt like I was finally coming back to life. One evening, as I sat on the couch, watching Emily play in the living room, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The pain, the loss, the heartbreak, it had all led me here, to this moment, where I was stronger than I had ever been. And even though there were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of the past threatened to pull me under, I knew that I had the strength to keep going. John had thought I'd crumble without him, that I'd beg him to come back. But I didn't. And as much as it hurt, as much as I had loved him, I was better off without him. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time I was the one in control.